Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm Catherine Hadro in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thanks for joining us. In this week's show, we speak with British pro-lifers about an abortion clinic buffer zone they call a criminalization of prayer. A teen Vogue article says abortion is funny. We speak out. And this.
It was a small time in my life, and the good memories and the good times and the family I have now outweigh those dark days in my childhood home.
One woman shares her remarkable journey from a home with abuse to foster care and adoption. But first, our top story, we speak with a top U.S. church leader about the role of religious liberty in the pro-life movement. Archbishop Joseph Kurtz is chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for Religious Liberty. Your Excellency, thank you for your time.
Catherine, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you and with all of the audience.
First off, how do you define religious liberty?
Well, religious liberty is, first of all, the first and most important of our liberties. And it's the ability for people of faith to be free to live their faith, both in the way they practice their faith and the way they can propose and become engaged in public life. It's one of the great gifts in the United States of America.
I have a story later in the show about a buffer zone in London preventing pro-lifers from praying outside of an abortion clinic. Is this becoming more common, and what role do you see religious liberty playing in the pro-life movement?
Well, thank you for asking about, in general, the pro-life movement. And as you know, I think it's so very important that we who stand up on behalf of all life, which includes the child in the womb, the mother, and all of the family, often people forget one or the other. I'm especially aware of the forgetting of the child in the womb. And so we know that we practice civility, but we also do so with both compassion and courage. Now, there are some challenges within the United States. I think there's some gains that have been made. One of the bills that is pending, and we hope will come through, is called the Conscience Protection Act. And that Conscience Protection Act is really meant to help people, in a sense, people in the healthcare area be able to practice their ministry and their work without being pressured or forced into participating in the procedure of an abortion. There was a person, a nurse in New York State that unfortunately worked in an operating room, and she, despite what really should have been her legal rights, she was forced to participate in the abortion of a child in the womb, 22 weeks in gestation. So we think this is a very important act. There's a second one, and there was a gain made actually with a Supreme Court decision. And that Supreme Court decision overruled a terrible ruling that was in the state of California. This was a ruling that, in a sense, required pro-life pregnancy help centers to give free advertising for abortion, I mean, of all things. And so this is another very important area. We're really grateful for what the Supreme Court did in this area. I think there's another area that I think is also important, and that deals with our efforts in ministry to immigrants and their families. Of course, the fact of having a work to welcome and see the dignity of each person, including people who are immigrants, is very important. Keep maintaining the family as intact is very important. And one of the things that people are being pressured, some of the state projects are actually pressuring those who have contracts, who are in faith-based organizations, to somehow get involved in referring to abortion. So we're fighting hard on this area, but as you can see, even though there have been gains, this is a time for great vigilance in the whole area.
It is important, and you hit on this, Your Excellency, how we're seeing a lot of these religious liberty issues play out in the Supreme Court. In your opinion, how important is it that the next confirmed Supreme Court justice upholds and respects religious liberty?
Well, of course, one of the things that the the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops does is we do not take positions on particular candidates for the Supreme Court, as I think you know. And we don't really promote in any way having a litmus test. But the good news is that the candidate being presented, I believe, is someone who honors the Constitution. And in honoring the Constitution is someone who's going to, I believe, do what's so important, and that is respect the dignity of the human person as protected by the Constitution. This is all good news. So I can't tell the future. I don't know all those areas to predict. However, I can say that I think the signs moving forward are very hopeful. And you may know that actually beginning this Friday, there is a novena that would begin this Friday and go all the way to the last Friday of September, promoted by Cardinal Dolan and our pro-life committee of the Bishops' Conference, in order to pray that the work of the Supreme Court will help safeguard and protect all human life, and of course that very much includes the innocent life of the child in the womb who has no protection, who needs us to speak for her or for him.
Finally, Your Excellency, you have been very open in sharing about your brother George, how he had Down syndrome and lived with you for 12 years, I think, before his passing. How did George's life influence the way you view the human person and the inherent dignity we all have?
Well, thank you. Catherine, I will make one correction. You said that he lived with me. I actually lived with him because he was my older brother, and he would remind anyone who would listen that he was the older brother and I was the one living with him. But it's true, after our mother died in 1989, I began as legal guardian for Georgie. And my brother George had a great impact on my life and really on the lives of my whole family. You'll probably meet many families who have the blessing of a child with Down syndrome. And they probably won't sugarcoat the challenges that involves, but they'll be sure to say that the blessings are far greater than any challenge, and the priorities that occur within our lives are different. I think there's just a deeper understanding of the importance of life, of friendship, of family, and I will say of faith too. So Georgie had a mighty impact on my life.
Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for Religious Liberty, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Catherine.
For Pro-Life Reaction Now, we're joined in studio by Mallory Quigley, the Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List. Mallory, as usual, it's great to have you here.
Good to see you, Catherine.
So following our interview with Archbishop Kurtz, I'd like to get your thoughts on the role of religious liberty in the pro-life movement.
Absolutely. Well, we're so thankful to the Archbishop for his pro-life leadership and leadership on religious liberty. I mean, for so many people that work in the pro-life movement or volunteer, they're motivated by their faith. So certainly we have such an important stake as Catholics, but the larger faith community in protections for religious liberty so that we can continue to engage in the pro-life sphere. I mean, just think about all the doctors and the nurses that you know. Certainly I do know a few, and my colleagues at Susan B. Anthony List. Our faith has driven us into the public square, and we want to be able to live out our pro-life beliefs and to encourage others to do so too.
That's beautiful. And the courts play a big role in this too, don't they?
Oh my gosh.
In a few minutes, we'll be speaking with two pro-life leaders in London about a buffer zone outside of an abortion clinic so they cannot pray outside and assist women in these unexpected pregnancies. And the UK courts upheld this.
Yes. Well, for better or for worse, the courts, they play a huge role. I mean, Roe versus Wade, when you think about it, was really an impediment to democracy, because a majority of Americans don't want the court deciding issues of abortion policy. They want the people to make those decisions through their elected representatives. We had just a new poll out last week, nearly 60% of Americans saying the place for abortion policy to be decided is in the states by the elected representatives. So it's unfortunate that the court plays such a large role, and I think that getting another pro-life vote on the Supreme Court, we're working our way to a situation where our democracy is no longer impeded by Roe.
And speaking of that, Archbishop Kurtz made clear he could not endorse a specific candidate, but said the good news about nominee to the Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, is that he honors and respects the Constitution, which means he will honor and respect the dignity of human life. How important is that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what we've been looking for on this list that the president had put forward is judges who respect the Constitution, who are in the mold of Antonin Scalia, of Neil Gorsuch, and that's exactly what we have in Judge Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, he himself is a Catholic, and we have a paper trail of some decisions that he's made. We have his own words saying that the government has a role in protecting life, and that the government shouldn't be forced in to provide these abortions.
And finally, Mallory, I want to get an update on something. This week marked the deadline of the public comment period for the Protect Life rule, which, if finalized, would cut off abortion providers from Title X funding. So what are the next steps?
Yes, well, I just want to thank the EWTN Pro-Life Weekly audience, because certainly I know for weeks we've been asking people to take action. There was more than 160,000 comments submitted, and at least 23,000 of those were from EWTN viewers and pro-life Americans working with the Susan B. Anthony list. So certainly it was very exciting to see that final count. So now the Department of HHS has to review all those comments, and certainly we know that there was some more technical comments submitted from my colleagues at Susan B. Anthony list addressing some of the specific claims that have been made in the media throughout this comment period. But once they review those, they'll be able to implement the final decision. And yes, $60 million that was going to Planned Parenthood, now that money can be sent to healthcare entities that do not see abortion as healthcare.
That is really encouraging to hear. Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony list. As always, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh is President Trump's nominee to replace Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court. As the Senate prepares to confirm the federal appeals court judge to the High Court, it can't be overstated how pivotal of a moment this is for the pro-life movement. Justice Kennedy has been a swing vote on abortion for decades. Confirming Kavanaugh to replace Kennedy on the High Court would mean confirming a justice who believes in the Constitution and the right to life. Supreme Court nominee Kavanaugh could be the deciding vote in a possible future case that could overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. With that, we go to this week's call to action. Tell your senators to confirm Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Here's how you can do that. Go to prolifeweekly.com. Type in some of your basic information so we can craft the message to be for your senators, and click submit at the bottom of the screen. Kavanaugh, a devout Catholic, has served on the D.C. Circuit Court for more than a decade. During his time on the bench, he forcefully rejected the ACLU's assertion of a new constitutional right of abortion on demand for illegal immigrant minors in U.S. custody. And in the case Priests for Life versus HHS, Kavanaugh refused to apply the HHS contraceptive mandate to religious entities. Now that President Trump has announced Kavanaugh is his Supreme Court pick, it's up to the U.S. Senate to confirm him. Let's put the pressure on the Senate to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the High Court. Again, the significance here cannot be overstated. Nominating and confirming Kavanaugh is a critical step towards possibly overturning the devastating Roe v. Wade decision. Go to prolifeweekly.com to tell your senators to confirm Supreme Court nominee Kavanaugh. We go now to pro-life headlines from around the globe. A recent government report reveals 3 minors were euthanized in Belgium in 2016 and 2017. Belgium legalized the euthanization of children in 2014 for minors of any age facing a terminal illness. In Sri Lanka, the president says the government will end its 42-year moratorium on capital punishment, despite requests by the European Union and others not to. President Maithripala Sirisena says the decision to implement the death penalty for drug smugglers, quote, will not be changed under any circumstance. Sri Lanka has maintained a moratorium on executions since 1976, but rising crime has led to public outcry for them to resume. And dozens of women clad in outfits reminiscent of The Handmaid's Tale took to the streets of Buenos Aires, Argentina, to promote abortion. While abortion is illegal in the South American nation, the Senate will debate on whether to legalize abortion through the first 14 weeks of pregnancy. Staying on that international front, our next pro-life story takes us to London. A British pro-lifer seeks to overturn a prayer ban outside of an abortion center. In early July, the High Court of England and Wales ruled a buffer zone outside of a London abortion facility is legal. The buffer zone, or public space protection order, effectively bans public prayer and counselors assisting women within 330 feet of the Marie Stopes Clinic, a leading abortion provider in the British city. Alina Dolguru filed a case against the Ealing Council at Court of Appeal, and she's the spokesperson for Be Here For Me, a group of women helped by pro-life vigils. And Claire McCullough is director of the Good Counsel Network, the group behind pro-life vigils outside of abortion centers. They join us now from London, England. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alina, you say you have personally been helped by the pro-lifers outside of the Marie Stopes Abortion Center. Can you give us a brief summary of your story?
At that moment when I became pregnant, I was in a relationship and I was working as a nanny live-in. And I knew once my employer found out I was pregnant, they would tell me to leave the house. And that happened at the end. The employer found out I was pregnant and they told me to leave the house. So I ended up homeless. My boyfriend, when he found out I was pregnant, he didn't want the baby. He just turned away, and he put a lot of pressure with me, with his family. I didn't have any support from friends, so I was alone in this situation. I rang the Mary Stopes and I asked help from them. I told them I'm not looking for an abortion, and they told me clearly that the only help they can offer is only abortion. And I didn't have any other choice than to get the abortion, and I booked an appointment with them.
And it was there at Marie Stopes that you then encountered pro-lifers outside, is that right?
Yes. I remember that day was a gentleman kneeling, praying, was everything very quiet. And once I went to the door of Mary Stopes, a lady just offered me a leaflet. And I just looked at the leaflet and then I asked her if the help is real. And she said yes, and I accept the help.
Beautiful. Claire, what exactly do pro-life vigils look like outside of the Marie Stopes?
Well, just as Alina has described them, we have somebody praying at the gate offering leaflets to women entering, and there'll be one or two other people praying away from the gate, just praying for the staff in the clinic, for the women, for the children, and for everyone involved in abortion.
Beautiful. And Alina, to be clear, you said yes to life. And how old is your child today?
She's 6 years old.
Incredible. Claire, Bishop Philip Egan of Portsmouth said he is deeply concerned by the imposition of no prayer zones. What is the implication here when it comes to prayer?
Well, it's really scary, actually. I mean, the council in Ealing have banned prayer for the length of a road that's about a quarter of a mile long. Nobody's allowed to pray about abortion on that road. No kind of prayer is actually allowed by the law. Silent prayer is technically banned by the law. We're not allowed to disapprove or approve of abortion on that road. Offers of help to women are seen as being in some way disapproving of abortion, so they're banned. There is a tiny square of grass that we can stand on about 150 metres away from the clinic, and we're allowed to have a small poster there, but that means that we're not actually seeing most of the women entering the abortion centre at all. If Alina had been going in that day, we wouldn't have met her and we wouldn't have been able to offer her a leaflet.
Just to look at the bigger picture here, this is happening in London, but what are the potential repercussions of this case? Why should our viewers outside of London be paying attention to this?
Well, there are at least 8 other councils that are looking at bringing in a PSPO or a buffer zone in their area. Some of them have already had consultations, so they'll be looking at bringing them in immediately. Lambeth is the next council that's definitely considering a buffer zone, and the evidence that they have, evidence against the vigils, is even less convincing than the evidence they have at Ealing. I mean, there is no evidence of any wrongdoing. And if they were banning the things they were claiming we do, like calling women murderer, which we do not do, blocking the pavements, if they were bringing in a ban for those things, no one would object. But if they think that's the problem, why are they then banning prayer and an offer of a leaflet? So we need the church behind us to stand up, and we need the lay people in the church to stand up.
And finally, Alina, I understand you've started a crowdfunding campaign. Can you tell us about that?
Well, surprisingly, it's going very, very well, and I'm quite happy that we have all the support, and it shows that a lot of people are against what is happening, and they're with us. They want the voice of this woman to be heard, and we make it as loud as possible.
You can find her appeal at GoFundMe.com. It's Alina Legal Fund is the name of her appeal.
That's incredible. Alina and Claire, thank you for being a pro-life leader, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
When we come back,
Children are some of the most victimized of our society, right? We see that all over the world, and some of that's right in front of us.
one woman shares the powerful reason why she believes the pro-life movement needs to prioritize foster care. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. Teen Vogue recently released an opinion article claiming abortion can be funny. That's the topic for this week's Speak Out segment. The outlet released a July article titled Lady Parts Justice League Fights Anti-Abortion Stigma with Humor. The op-ed writer is a member of what she calls a grassroots, comedy-driven pro-abortion organization. The so-called comedy group tours around in a van hosting shows, barbecues, and parties to, quote, celebrate abortion. Part of the goal, according to the writer, is to normalize the abortion procedure. Media specifically targeted to adolescents should be held to a high standard because the teenage years are incredibly impressionable. And this article was pure abortion propaganda. When this so-called comedy group asserts that there's no trauma in abortion, that it should be a humorous topic, they are ignoring the voices of women who are courageous enough to say they regret their abortion. Look at the Silence No More awareness campaign. Look at Project Rachel. We cannot do these brave women the injustice of not hearing their pain. These abortion jokes are assaults in their open wound. And it's important to note, this is not a type of humor people embrace. It's truly uncomfortable for everyone. Why? Because there is nothing funny about abortion. The taking of a human life is no laughing matter. Remember, there is always something you can do to counter today's culture of death by following this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and tell your senators to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. As pro-lifers, we're often advocates for children at a time when they can't advocate for themselves. And that love for a child doesn't just end once he or she is outside of the womb. This next story is a reminder for us all about how we can care for children in need. Here's this week's Pro-Life Focus.
I want to thank National Right to Life for having me first.
Today, Sarah Zagorski is a rising pro-life voice, but her start in life was an uphill climb. 28 years ago, Sarah was born inside of an abortion clinic where her birth mother was induced by an abortionist at only 26 weeks along.
I was her 7th pregnancy, and her pregnancy was the result of an affair, so there was a lot of shame involved in the pregnancy as well. She was familiar with abortion. She had 2 previous abortions in her life. So she wasn't someone that was distant from abortion. She knew what the procedure entailed. She knew what it was about. And she ended up going to an abortionist to have me. And ultimately, the abortionist told her that she should let me die on the table.
But when her mother threatened legal action against the abortionist, newborn Sarah was taken to the hospital, was treated, and survived. To this day, Sarah does not know for certain why she was born in an abortion clinic, as her birth mother struggled with both mental illness and poverty.
She had gone to him because she was told his costs were low. Like in her mind, I don't even know what her intention was in that. You know, I know she was familiar with abortion. I knew he was an abortionist, but I also knew that she was told he was cheap.
The setbacks in Sarah's early life continued. At 16 months, abuse and neglect were found in her home, so she was brought into the foster care system for the first time. Sarah was placed with a loving Christian couple, but later was taken back to her biological family. It was an environment she calls a cocktail of depravity.
I had older siblings that were abusive, and then I also had a stepfather who was abusive and mentally ill too. So I had all these people kind of, you know, trying to tear me down emotionally, and also on top of that, I was starving. I was not eating on a regular basis, and you know, my childhood dilemma wasn't, am I going to watch Sesame Street? It was, you know, or am I going to watch Barney? It was.
For the next few years throughout her childhood, Sarah would ping pong from her biological family back to the same loving foster care family, until finally, at the age of 9, she was officially adopted by her foster care parents. Sarah counts her blessings today.
And I have an amazing family because of them, not just them, but their extended family. I have cousins and aunts and uncles that are in my life that are just as real as anyone else's cousins and aunts and uncles. So it's a full network of family that I have that's taken me in as their own, and I don't feel any different than a child. I think that's in a biological family.
The Christian woman says she can see God's fingerprints all over her life.
When my foster family came into my life, they introduced the gospel to me right away, kind of the suffering Savior who died on the cross for me, and I got to know the suffering Savior at a young age, and that was something I needed to recover from the pain of my childhood, you know, being abandoned and being, you know, going through the process of trying to forgive my birth mother. And I had to like encounter I had an encounter with Jesus that really brought into my life healing to say, okay, you know what this is like to be abandoned and to be abused.
Now, Sarah is married, is mother to a baby boy, and is using her life experiences for good. Working at Louisiana Right to Life, Sarah advocates for life, foster care, and adoption.
As pro-life individuals, we respect the dignity of all life in the womb and then outside of the womb. And children are some of the most victimized of our society, right? We see that all over the world, and some of that's right in front of us. So if we're pro-life about the baby in the womb, we need to be pro-life for that child that's suffering in foster care. Or I know in America there's 100,000 children who have just got out of the foster care system who are waiting to be adopted. You know, they're ready to be adopted, but no one's there to adopt them.
The abortion industry targets poor, struggling families because of the lie some babies would be better off dead than being born in a home of poverty. Sarah says her story proves that's not true.
For me, I always say the suffering I went through as a child was so minimal to the joy I have now. You know, it was a small time in my life, and the good memories and the good times and the family I have now outweigh those dark days in my childhood home.
The 28-year-old wants other children to also have that chance at joy. As she continues to advocate for foster care, Sarah shares this message with us.
All families need to know, if you have a safe place for your child, you are qualified to be a foster parent. And if you will love this child unconditionally like you would love your own child, you're qualified to be a foster parent. If you have a family that can love and support a child, your family is enough.
That'll do it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, but I'd love to hear from you before next week, so you can send me an email at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or like my public page on Facebook so we can keep this pro-life conversation going. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.